Okay, so user TcheQuevara, not Che Guevara, TcheQuevara, is asking about New Testament fables as literature, using certain figures of speech, hyperboles, and surprise endings that are reminiscent of jokes. Then talking about the camel and the needle. Um, and then he's pointing out, as a researcher in humor, that the idea of there being humor present is uncomfortable for him. Um, that the Bible as a whole don't ever use humor. This is actually something I take up in the book. When I do the run through of the chapters, I mention, I think it's maybe chapter 12, where I refer to humor specifically in the ancient fable context and how this has basically been sequestered when we analyze the so-called parables of Jesus. And I cite a bunch of scholars who, from the 1800s especially, who talk about how Jesus can't crack a joke. Obviously, he's a man of sorrows. And so this is nothing like the fables at all. Um, but elsewhere, we see Hebrew, I think, see humor throughout the Hebrew Bible, for example. And this is actually a fairly recent trend to be looking for areas of humor. So in that chapter, I talk about this quite a bit. And one of the obstacles we have has a term. It's called the syndrome of reverence. It's the idea that whatever your religious text is, your religious text can't make jokes because religious texts are serious. And if they were to ever include jokes, well, then they wouldn't be serious anymore, right? And this also has to do with kind of a trend during the Enlightenment. And the conflict, so to say, between scriptural ideas, the idea of something being inspired by God, and natural science sort of taking the helm. Scholars of the Bible were often very concerned to show that biblical text is also something to be taken seriously, that this isn't just a comedy going on. So there are some great examples of humor in the fables of Jesus. So the example that I'm working with especially is the fable of the judge and the widow. And even how this text is translated, it's almost been deliberately translated in ways to stamp out the humor in it. So the story goes, there was a certain judge in a certain town who had no respect for people and didn't care about anyone. In the same town, there was also a widow who kept coming to him and pestering him and saying, "Give me justice against my adversary." And for a while, the judge was able to ignore her, but eventually, after she bothered him so much, he gave her what she wanted. And he thought these things in his head. That is a very bad translation of what the Greek text is doing there. The fable really goes, there was a certain judge in a certain town who neither respected people nor cared about anyone but himself, basically. And in that same village, there was a widow who kept coming to him and saying, "Grant me vengeance against my opponent." And for a while, the judge was able to, keep her off of him. But after a while, he came to himself and thought, if I don't give this widow what she wants, in the end, she's going to come and give me a black eye. Therefore, I will grant her vengeance against her opponent. And the verb to give a black eye is very particular. It's hupopiazo. This does not mean to bother somebody. It means literally underneath the eye. So translations have basically blocked this out and removed the humor of it because it's somewhat scandalous. We can't have Jesus telling slapstick comedy kind of parables. But yes, so I would certainly say that what you're seeing is right. The surprising endings, the hyperboles, and so on. These are humorous comic elements that find great analogies in the ancient fable tradition and are indeed in the fable tradition of Jesus as well, if we'd only be willing to see the humor in them. So that's a great question. I will now upload this for you.